Hey guys, this is Maniac with GameAccess.net doing my fifth site podcast. Again, this is just me by myself. What we're going to be talking about this week is the Sony exclusive property Resistance. Resistance has actually been a pretty popular franchise for the PlayStation. It was a launch game for the PlayStation 3. Since then, it has spawned four games, three PlayStation 3 exclusives, and one PlayStation Portable exclusive. The three major games, the three PlayStation 3 games, were released by Insomniac Studios, and the IP was actually created by Insomniac Studios. The PlayStation Portable game was Resistance Retribution, which was released for the PlayStation Portable and was done by Bend Studios. I think that was licensed out by Sony. I'm not totally certain about that, but that was done by a separate team. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what my experiences are with the platform, and also some of the development of the game property themselves. So we're going to be talking about, four games that have been released over the course of about, 4 or 5 years. The first game came out in 2006, and the most recent game came out last year. There is talk that there will be a fifth game released. It will be a PlayStation Vita exclusive. It's being done by, I think, Nihilistic Software, which is doing it for the Vita. I'm fairly certain it is a Vita exclusive. They're not going to do a PlayStation Portable version of it. I'm sorry, a PlayStation 3 version of it. And there has been no talk about a Resistance 4. Right now, Resistance 3 is considered to be like the big closure of that trilogy. So, what can I say about this franchise? Except probably just to start off from the beginning. Insomniac, of course, has been famous for the Ratchet and Clank series, but not a lot of people have known that before Resistance, they actually and even before Ratchet and Clank, they actually did do shooters. They actually were a shooter company. My first exposure to Resistance Fall of Man actually came when I got a little promotional package from Sony. As I said in previous podcasts and probably in previous articles, I used to be a member of the Sony Gamer Advisory Panel. The cool thing about that panel was you could basically get selected to be a part of it. I'm not exactly certain how many members there were total or even if they're still doing it, but I honestly don't think they're still in operation. I think for right now it's probably been taken over by the PlayStation Plus service, that the perks that I used to get are probably going to the PlayStation Plus guys. And before that it was the guys who signed up for Core. The service was a very good service, and basically you got into the mailing list by whenever you plugged in your PlayStation 2 to the network and tried to set up your network configuration on the PlayStation 2. Back then you actually had to do that manually. And when you did that, you signed up for a very early version of the PlayStation Network. You gave it an email address, and you could log on to their website. I actually got an email saying that I had been selected for the Gamer Advisory Panel, and that allowed me greater access into this thing. And I usually get leaflets, demos mailed to me, and that sort of thing. So that all having been said, I was being used to getting copies of like demos mailed to me and just various stuff like Shadow of the Colossus or the God of War, the God of War 2 or the God of War Ghosts, Chains of Olympus demos. Basically, I always get demos mailed to me. And this one time I actually got a promotional material for the Resistance games. And it was made up to look like a briefcase. It was still just all paper and stuff like that, but it was really nice looking. And it had information about the alternate history of what the Resistance series was going for. Now, I didn't have a PlayStation 3 at the time. I had no intention of really getting a PlayStation 3 at the time. So I wasn't super motivated to look up the game because, of course, I knew that I didn't have a PlayStation and I wasn't going to get one, at least not at the time. But I did keep in the back of my head that if I ever did get a PlayStation 3, I would have considered, looking up that game. In fact, actually, up to the part of the PlayStation 3's release, Resistance Fall of Man, the very first Resistance game, was looking to be the killer app of that platform. Because there was no God of War exclusive game for that release. So the God of War 2 was going to release for the PlayStation 2. So if there, the major volley, the major launch volley was going to be the Resistance Fall of Man game. So fast forward just a tiny bit. I used to actually also get copies of the Game Developer Magazine. I used to have a subscription of that. And the reason why I loved getting Game Developer Magazine is because my favorite section was the postmortems. I loved reading postmortems. That was like my favorite thing to read on the game developer's website. If you go to gamasutra.com, they have a whole section devoted to what they call postmortems. These are literally game development stories and written by the people that have worked on various games. They talk about what went right, they talk about what went wrong, and then they talk about what they're going to do to improve it. But they also tell stories about the game development, and that always fascinated me. I've at the time when before my subscription ran out, and I haven't had the opportunity to renew it. I've begged Game Developer to please renew me, but it is extremely expensive, and for some odd reason, they're not doing the free renewal promotion anymore. They've since I actually did get issues that had Resistance: Fall of Man headlined, and also of all things, the first Uncharted game headline. Reading the stories about the development of those games again also got me interested in the platform. Obviously, Uncharted had not yet come out, but probably by the time that Resistance: Fall of Man, the Resistance: Fall of Man article had come out, I believe the PlayStation 3 had launched. If not, it was very, very close to launch. And I was extremely excited to read it. I was actually very interested in the game itself. I thought it was quite interesting. So the PlayStation 3 launches at the end of 2006, and Resistance: Fall of Man is a launch title for it. Resistance: Fall of Man gets very, very high critic remarks, makes a bunch of top lists, scores very highly by a bunch of different organizations, and it's considered to be probably the killer app for the PlayStation 3. In fact, actually, I heard a lot of people refer to it as like the Halo of the PlayStation 3, basically, remembering that Halo was the major system seller for the Xbox when it launched in the last generation. Now, there was some talk, obviously, about the PlayStation 3 didn't really sell when it first came out. And the reason why it wasn't selling was because of the really high price point. Now, I don't know if a lot of people remember this, but the PlayStation 3 was very expensive when it launched. Very expensive. How expensive was it? You could buy an Xbox 360 and a Nintendo Wii for the same price as you could buy a PlayStation 3 at launch, with launch prices. That was pretty outrageous, and a lot of people were very much against having PlayStation 3s alone for just the high price of the unit. They didn't want to pay that. They didn't want the high price. They didn't care for the high price of the unit. They didn't think the price was justified, and they weren't going to buy it just because of that. The people that bought the PlayStation 3s at launch were, obviously there were Sony enthusiasts that bought it, major devotees based upon the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2 generations. Those bought there were those people that bought the game system. And Resistance was, of course, the major launch title for them. The other, people that were actually ended up buying these early consoles were probably the home theater enthusiasts. The PlayStation 3 really was a very early form of like the centerpiece for what that next generation of home theaters were going to be, the HDMI-equipped HD televisions with full 1080p resolution and everything else. A lot of people were really looking forward to that being released because they wanted to have some excuse to show off their new televisions. So those guys ended up pretty happy. And the PlayStation 3s were being stocked by television stores and high-end electronic stores and stuff like that, where they were being sold to home theater enthusiasts. But Resistance: Fall of Man was kind of suffering a little bit in sales because the PlayStation 3 wasn't selling as well as it was. I mean, I remember I didn't even get a PlayStation 3 until much later. PlayStation 3s could be found in stores within a month of its release. The Nintendo Wii wasn't being able to... You couldn't find a Nintendo Wii for at least a year. No, I'm sorry, for 2 years after it launched. You couldn't find it anywhere. In fact, for the longest time, I was convinced that the Nintendo Wii was just some joke or something like that. Because for 2 years, quote-unquote, after its launch, I hadn't seen it on a single shelf. No one could ever have claimed to have been able to find one. I thought it was some kind of myth. Of course, I'm exaggerating here. Sarcasm. But you could find a Nintendo. I'm sorry, you couldn't find a Nintendo Wii for a while. You could find a PlayStation 3 pretty quickly after its launch. In fact, I remember Penny Arcade were talking about that. Actually, they made a joke about it. Now, in retrospect, I don't remember how long it took for the Xbox 360 to be found on shelves, but I remember getting an Xbox 360 probably around April of 2006. So it was, and I did find it on shelves, so it was within some reasonable standards of time. I don't remember exactly how long it had been on shelves or been viewable on shelves before I picked up mine, but I picked it up because I did find it on shelves. So then you had the controversial interviews that were going on, and I specifically remember that there was a news organization, I believe it was One Up. They interviewed David Jaffe, who had just recently been promoted after the release of God of War. And the first question that was asked to David Jaffe was, do you think that do you think that Sony left Resistance Fall of Man to die? Now, David Jaffe, to his honor, never lost his cool at that kind of question. He just kind of paused there and said, keep going. Like he was waiting for the reviewer to actually say, where the hell did you pull that one out of your ass, basically. That was my reading on it. And if you watch that video, if you can find that video, I'm sure I have it somewhere in my files because that was back before the streaming stuff. This was back when you actually downloaded your video interviews and stuff like that. The guy said about the sales of Resistance Fall of Man when it came down to the fact of how highly the game was, how highly the game was rated, should have been doing well, or should have been selling better, and should have been selling units better. The guy didn't take into account and didn't mention anything along the lines of, maybe the PlayStation 3 wasn't selling because it was really expensive, but that it was the game's fault or it was Sony's fault for not properly marketing the game. I mean, I know when Halo released, that was very highly rated. It was probably also very highly selling. Halo, up until about the time Halo 2 came out, was in the top 10 of game releases. I'm sorry, of game sales. Was in the top 10 of game sales for the Xbox platform, and didn't leave that top 10 for the 3 or 4 years until Halo 2 came out. When Halo 2 came out, Halo 1 did finally leave that top 10 in sales. It still continued to sell, I'm sure, because you could probably still find it in sale. It's still in print. And that game did sell well. That game, for a system that was a number 2, and by that I mean the Xbox was the number 2 system of last generation, that game did sell very well. And here this guy was saying that it was Sony's fault that Resistance Fall of Man didn't share the same sales. Obviously, there was some other problems with that. Obviously, I don't think anybody really paid much attention to the PlayStation 3. I certainly was because I couldn't afford one. I mean, it wasn't until I think it was summer 2007 when I was working steady. I had a pretty good paying job that year, and I was working really steady. Had a good job that summer, and they had just dropped the price. They had just done the $100 price drop for the PlayStation 3 because they think they were bringing in a new model, and the premium model at the time, which was the 60 gig FATs, they dropped to $500, which was still more expensive than an Xbox 360 was, but it was slightly more reasonable when you took into account the cost of Blu-ray players still at that time. And they were offering rebates and stuff like that. They were offering like a 5 Blu-ray deal for free. You can get 5 free Blu-rays with it. So I thought that was reasonable. When I finally had the chance, when I finally got paid, I immediately went to the store to put down my money for a PlayStation 3, and I made sure that the first things I got with the PlayStation 3 was a copy of Resistance Fall of Man and a PlayStation remote. That was literally what I got. Oh, and I was able to get $5 off on that. I was racking up like almost $600 worth of cost because Resistance Fall of Man $60, PlayStation $500. PlayStation remote was like I think $30 at the time. It's cheaper now, but it was, I think, 30 at the time. So you got almost $600 in in sales here. I got $5 off from Best Buy. Thank you, Best Buy, for your wonderful Best Buy Reward Zone system. So, yeah. After all those hundreds of dollars spent, $5, I was happy about that. So I play through Resistance. I get Resistance Fall of Man, and I gotta say that the game was right up my alley. I am an enormous fan of documentaries, and I know I've posted on my website a whole bunch of times about gaming documentaries. But I love watching all kinds of different documentaries, even about stuff I don't even care about. I love watching documentaries about them. I love the History Channel. I love Discovery Channel, and of course all their subsidies. Planet Green and Animal Planet, and National Geographic Channel. I love all those kind of stuff, and I really really liked how the story was presented in Resistance: Fall of Man because of the yeah, some of the critics kind of cried foul on those cutscenes, basically saying, "Oh, you're showing concept art and screenshots because you didn't have the time, you couldn't make the release." But no, I thought it was an artistic reason. I actually liked that they chose to do the cutscenes in the game very much in a style of like a Ken Burns type documentary, because I love those kind of documentaries. Ken Burns is real. A lot of Ken Burns' documentaries I do think went a little bit long, but I really liked Empire of Dreams. I thought that was a fantastically done documentary. I really was yes, he directed Empire of Dreams, which I think is now in syndication. But if anybody who has the original Star Wars DVDs box set, it's on the fourth disc. It's a really great documentary. And but I just so I kind of always thought of it as like History Channel meets Sci-Fi Channel. Awesome, just awesome on both counts. The gameplay was great. I thought the graphics were really good, and the multiplayer I thought was probably some of the most balanced, most fun multiplayer that I had played since Halo 3. Yes, I had played Halo 3 before playing Resistance: Fall of Man. I don't remember particularly. I definitely had played through Halo 3. And played Halo 3 multiplayer before playing Resistance: Fall of Man's multiplayer, and I thought it was really, really well done. Of course, I also liked Halo 3's multiplayer as well, but I thought both were extremely well done. And I always, I'm a harsh critic on multiplayer. If I don't like the multiplayer, I will not play it, and I will hate it. So if it wasn't good, I would have told you guys. I think remember the game actually did have a level cap, and I think level 60. The game's release predated achievements, so it had its own little special thing going on, and they never ported achievements to it. I don't know why. Probably because they just didn't have the time or the initiative to do it. But instead of achievements in Resistance: Fall of Man, there were the skill points. Whoever actually came up with the skill points, or I should say, not the skill points themselves, but whoever decided what the skill points were, I hate you. Because as a completionist, as a really hardcore completionist, some of those skill points were really, really hard. Yeah. The ones about, particularly, they started getting really, really, really bad around the second chapter when you started having to dodge timed mines and stuff like that. Those were really tough. Some of them were easier, but they never actually said what they were. You actually had to look up an FAQ online to know what they were. The game didn't tell you that. Also, there was intel collects and stuff like that too. I got to admit, it was all right. But it really made my gameplay really slow going. I think it took a couple months for me to actually get to the final scene in the game. Now, obviously, I was in no rush or anything like that, but I remember specifically I played through a lot of games over the course of me just trying to play through Resistance: Fall of Man. Another complaint, another thing I wanted to mention was, of course, and this still hasn't been corrected, but Resistance: Fall of Man was also one of those games, because it was a 720 game, and of course so are so many other PlayStation exclusives, because it locked at 720 and didn't have a 1080 or 1080p release. I'm sure to say compatibility, because the PlayStation 3 doesn't upsample. The first TV I played it on, I had to play it on 480p. I had to play the game in progressive, and the reason why was because um, it wasn't an upsample, and that TV that I was playing it on couldn't wasn't compatible with 720. Most new televisions now actually are, as long as you play them through HDMI. If you some component connections are not compatible with 720. That depends upon what your resolution of the TV are. If you pick up a 720 television or one of those 1330s by 728 televisions, usually they only do 1080i through the component connection. But most of the new 1080 televisions that I get right now, that I've seen right now, are compatible with 720 through component and HDMI. So that's obviously now obsolete, but back then, 4 or 5 years ago, most of the new TVs that you have in your house, most of the new HD TVs in your house had no HDMI connections, and they didn't support 720. They were 1080 only. So that was a problem, but you buy a new TV eventually, and the problem goes away. And I really liked how, I really liked the graphics of Resistance Fall of Man. I was really happy with how it looked. Um, so if I had to say what my favorite moments of the game were, probably have to say that there were probably had to do with the dialogue and the cutscenes. I don't want to go too much into it because I'm really in like fear of spoilers and stuff like that, and I really don't want to spoil that for you guys. But I will remember a few, just a few things that I really liked. Um, right after, around the time I guess basically I started playing Resistance Fall of Man, there had not been talk of any sequels or anything like that. I believe, there was the talk about a new Ratchet and Clank game that was under development by Insomniac. And Insomniac had its podcast, The Full Moon Show, that I think they launched right around the time that Resistance Fall of Man came out. I loved The Full Moon Show. Back before I even had my first iPhone or any iDevice, I had, I finally started using iTunes predominantly. I really haven't been interested in the Windows. I used to use the Windows, I guess it was, what is it called? The Windows movie player or Windows video player, up until they did version 9. Once version 10 came out, I absolutely hated the interface, and I just basically decided just to go strictly to iTunes. iTunes, it didn't have the interface I wanted by default, but at least I could turn the interface that I wanted to iTunes. At least I could get the interface that I wanted out of iTunes, and I was very happy with that. So I basically switched predominantly to just using iTunes from then on. And I started listening to podcasts, and when I found out about the Full Moon Show, I immediately started listening to it. I gotta say to you guys, if anybody from Insomniac is listening to this, the intro that I loved the best was these guys would actually cycle through various intros. Most of them were just tongue in cheek and stuff like that. But the intro that I loved the best was from the Full Moon Show was definitely Captain Quark's introduction from the very first episode. I thought they had used it more than they did. Maybe because it just stuck in my mind so much, but I really loved when they used Captain Quark's intro for some of those episodes, and I really wish they would use it more because it really is that funny. But it opens with you play some music. I think it was like Ratchet and Clank music or something like that, and he would say, "Throughout the span of time." Yes, he has that deep voice. There have only been 4 figures influential enough to shake the very stratum of existence. I don't want to go through it because I probably get sued for copyright. But if you want, you can just listen to some of the Insomniac Full Moon Show podcast, and you'll probably find them using it. You'll probably hear it at one point. But I thought it was pretty ballsy how he says there's only 4 figures influential enough to shake the very stratum of existence. I mean, yes, Captain Quark, you have that's ballsy for you to make that statement. But okay. I also remember, I think I was using that as I love this statement so much, I think I used it as what do you call it, a signature occasionally. I remember signing off with that way back when. And when I'd have conversations with friends and stuff like that. This was way before I had a website. So I finally do beat I finally do beat Resistance Fall of Man, and of course, like everybody, I just wanted more. I went back and I got some more of the skill points, but I still wasn't able to get the majority of them, especially the majority of the high point ones, because that game was hard. And cranking up the difficulty was really tough too. I mean, that's a really hard game. And those were some really, really, really hard skill points. Just very difficult. Um, so I decided, basically what I do was I kind of split the difference. I'd go between the multiplayer and try to level up in that. And then I get bored of it, and then I go back to the single player and try to get more skill points. And basically, this continued on until I stopped playing the game because they made the next announcement. Now, Sony and Insomniac announced, I think around the same time, that it was definitely after Ratchet and Clank had come out. That Ratchet and Clank, I think it was called Tools of Destruction, if I remember correctly. I think that was the Ratchet and Clank game that came out after they had released the Resistance Fall of Man. But don't quote me on that. But I'm fairly certain it was Tools of Destruction. Right after the Ratchet and Clank game came out, they had announced the Resistance 2 was in development. And they started talking about that. But more than just a Resistance 2 game was in development, they also said that a Resistance PSP game was coming out. And that they were being developed by two separate teams, and that they were going to be at it around the same time. They were doing promotion for both of the games at around the same time. It seemed like both of the games were going to be kind of like sister games. And the reason why was because they were going to have interconnectivity between the two. But not just like, a little gimmicky interconnectivity, like, oh, hi, you can, put this on that, and, it's nothing really show-stopping. They were doing something show-stopping with this game development, and I thought that was just awesome. Now, obviously, Resistance 2 has been out for a while, as has the Resistance PSP game. And at the time, obviously this wasn't the first game to actually have PSP to PS3 interconnectivity, or even PSP to PS2 interconnectivity. I believe, I'm certain of this. When Metal Gear Solid 3 released the Subsistence Edition, it actually did have connectivity with Metal Gear Acid 2. If anybody doesn't know what the heck either of those things are, let me explain. The PlayStation 2 actually had USB ports in the front. Most of them were never used. I mean, I think that a few surround sound amplifiers made use of it. Maybe a few speaker systems made use of it. But for the most part, they were not used. They weren't used for controller ports. Controller ports were something different. And it wasn't used for memory card slots because memory card slots were something different. They kept with the PS1's port connectivity. It wasn't until the PS3 came around that they finally just decided, let's just start using USBs and regular memory card slots and stuff like that. So, you could actually, in theory, if you wrote the software into your game, you could actually, in theory, have connectivity between multiple devices. The PlayStation Portable has a USB port on the top of it. So, in theory, it could work. So they started doing that kind of stuff with like I said, with the PlayStation 2. When the PlayStation 3 came out, obviously the PlayStation Portable was already out. They had already had some, interconnectivity, like you could use it to download your, PlayStation Portable. You could download PlayStation Portable games to your PlayStation 3 and transfer them to the PlayStation Portable, just as you can do right now. That's more, it's more use. So with the PlayStation 3, it all got expanded. But here they were doing something really awesome. Here they said you could unlock a whole new campaign with a whole new story by connecting the two if you had both of the games. That to me was really awesome, especially given the fact that they said you could have all different types of actually the gameplay would change also. The story would change, the gameplay would change, that sort of thing. I was really excited. I mean, that stuff couldn't come soon enough. And I remember, obviously, right now, I think that I can't remember if what was going to go on was because the Resistance PlayStation Portable game had been delayed, or because maybe it might have been coming sooner, or it was always intended to come out much later than it did. But then there was talk of basically around it was going to be the Resistance 2 is going to be coming out in November of 2008. Now, 2008 was a really swamped year for major releases. Gears of War 2 came out that year. Um, and also there was the Guitar Hero World Tour release. There was the Rock Band 2 release. And then there were other major releases that were smaller releases. Like Mirror's Edge came out that year, and Dead Space came out that year, the first Dead Space game. All the original IPs that year pretty much got almost completely ignored. Because most of the major stuff was all in the sequels. Like a lot of this, because the sequels were getting collector's editions. Resistance 2 had a collector's edition. Gears of War 2 had a collector's edition. Rock Band and Guitar Hero had very, very, very expensive collector's editions, but they kind of had to because they had to have the peripherals. This was just the time at the height of the music releases. So that's what was going on at the time, at least with the gaming industry. It was really expensive, and it was just getting really tough. Almost all the minor releases were becoming collector's editions, and the collector's editions were getting more and more expensive with each release. I think it was probably when the Halo 3 Legendary Edition came out, it almost gave them a license to go absolutely berserk when it came to game price release. But I think the first major premium collector's edition was actually the Devil May Cry 4 collector's edition. That was the first, I think that was the first major United States release to have a premium edition that was more than $10 premium. And I think it had like a $15 to $20 premium. And that was unheard of at the time. Most of them were just $10. And after that, it was basically 10, 20, 10 was over after that. It was like 20, 25, 50. Yeah, it got really, really tough really, really quickly. So Resistance 2 launched, and they did a pre-order incentive for like some downloadable content, which I thought was pretty cool. And they had a collector's edition which had a behind-the-scenes Blu-ray, a action figure included, like a little collectible figure, and a smaller art book. And I think that was it. And I think maybe a download code or two, like an exclusive download code. It was a good collector's edition. It was really nice, really cool really cool artwork to it. It was similar at the time. I probably more would, if there was a release that was very, very similar in style to it, I'd probably say the BioShock collector's edition at release was probably very similar, because that also had an action figure, a disc, and an art book. I'm fairly certain of all that. So the first BioShock game, which was only for at the time, the Xbox 360 and the PC, I think it was pretty similar to that. And it was also very similar in price to that. So it worked very well. It was a pretty cool documentary that was on the disc. I liked the art book. I liked what was included. And the action figure was cool looking. So Resistance 2 comes out, and it actually already in the game had its copy of had the PSP connectivity software built into it already, but the PSP game wasn't out yet. Now, I'm not going to talk about the PlayStation Portable game just yet, because I want to just talk a little bit about Resistance 2, if I may. Resistance 2, by all accounts, was a disappointment, especially in comparison to the first Resistance game. A lot of people complain that they really haloed it, and the reason why was because that they ditched most of the gameplay stuff that made Resistance: Fall of Man unique. They kind of ditched for Resistance 2. Insomniac, even though the game had been received very well by the critics, a lot of the hardcore community, myself included, I'm not as harsh as some of the other critics, and I won't be as harsh as some of the other critics, because I think that Resistance 2 was still a good game. It was still really hard, but I still think that Resistance 2 was really good. It had some fantastic moments in it. I still think a lot of people complain that they ditched a lot of the gameplay stuff that was what made the first Resistance game so great. My major complaint was that they did away with the Ken Brooks style documentary stuff. I did not like that they did away with it. They opted instead for traditional personal cutscenes narrated by Nathan Hale. Um, I really like Nathan Hale as a character. I didn't know I haven't really talked about him, but because, well, let's face it, he's only in 2 games. But so I'm going to kind of hold off on that just a little bit. Probably one of my favorite, probably my favorite experience in the game. My favorite part of the game is probably fighting the really, really big chimera. I remembered seeing that back when they did the demo at E3 a couple of years back, and I was like, "Oh man, I can't wait to play that scene." And sure enough, we got to, and I was really, really liked it. I really liked the story of the second game. I just didn't really like how it was as much how it was presented. I thought the graphics and the graphics engine was absolutely beautiful. I thought the artwork was absolutely beautiful, the colors and everything else. But like a lot of people, I just didn't like the gameplay as much. I didn't like the weapon wheel was gone, and you were restricted to only 2 games. I'm sorry, only restricted to two weapons. Regenerative health I can live with. That was pretty much a standard by the time that game came out, so I was fine with the regenerative health. But if I had the biggest complaint about the game, and the biggest thing that was probably upsetting to me, it was the multiplayer. I did not like the multiplayer of Resistance 2. I thought it was nowhere near as good as Resistance 1's, and nowhere near as balanced. I thought it was extremely unbalanced, if anything. And so I think I probably should have gotten the first inkling was back when I was beta testing the Resistance 2 multiplayer, because I was a beta tester of that. I think it was probably I was given access with pre-order, but I did not like I didn't play the Resistance 2 multiplayer that much at all. I just had no interest, and the trophies in multiplayer were so time consuming as to be pretty much not even worth it. Particularly the 10,000, I think it was a 10,000 kill in multiplayer, which I think all the developers have since regretted upon. And I think they regretted making that because they realized, yeah, 10,000, that's a lot. But they still put it in the game. So I did like Resistance 2, but I didn't like it as much as I liked the first. But I still liked it. It was still a good game. I really liked the David Dunbar stuff. No, was his name David Dunbar? The guy on the radio. Probably wasn't David Dunbar, but I mean, the guy. I love the radio bits. I thought that was great drama. I did not like that Rachel Parker didn't come back. I really wanted Rachel Parker to return because I liked her. I think a lot of people were like, "Hey, I think something's going on between him and Parker in Resistance Fall of Man." They never touched. They never went any further on it. There is a letter that's in the game where Parker actually wrote a letter to Hale's commanding officer, and you can find it. And she assumes that possibly he was alive at that point. She was fairly certain by that point that he had survived, but she wasn't certain of it. And she says if she does get the letter, I mean if he is indeed alive, to give him the letter, and you find it, but what she meant to give to you isn't included. So that was that. You know, it would have been nice to see what her feelings were. So that was I thought that was kind of a lost opportunity. And then, of course, there's the ending, which is extremely left up for interpretation. But, you know, at the very end, Capelli kills Hale. Just shot in the head, he's dead, you clearly see him die. Also very disappointing, but you know what? It was a good setup. The whole plotline of the game was going to be revolving around the time between, the time of Hale's death. So it made sense that it would end with Hale's death, but I was kind of hoping if you were going to kill Hale, then wrap up the story there. Then have a conclusion to the story there. I mean, you spend just as much time creating a protagonist for the story as you do creating the story itself. It's disappointing when you just, kill him off. And then create a new protagonist for each subsequent game. So, after finishing Resistance 2 and getting all the trophies I got in Resistance 2, I did not co-op it. I tried co-oping it during the multiplayer beta test. It was just impossible to co-op with just 2 people. You really need to have a full 7 people. And I just didn't have that many people. I didn't have really any friends that had copies of. I didn't have any friends that had PS3s at the time, let alone copies of Resistance 2. And split screen was quite, split screen just wasn't enough. You couldn't get through a campaign with just 2 people. It was too difficult. So there was that. So then attention shifted from Resistance 2 to Resistance Retribution for the PSP. They started giving out demos with pre-orders for Resistance Retribution that you could, I think they gave either they gave out a download code, I believe. They sent it out. And you could redeem it on your PSP and download the demo there. And the cool thing was that the demo actually had the PS2 to PSP connectivity. It had the infection mode built into it, so you could use the features that were promised between the Resistance 2 and Resistance Retribution connectivity on the demo. So you can not only demo the game, but you could also demo all the game's features. I absolutely loved. My appetite was really, really excited. I was super excited after having played the demo. I really was looking forward to the game. Now, I believe that Resistance Retribution came out about 5 months after Resistance 2 did. So it was a long wait. It really was. I think it came out around March 2009, if I remember correctly. Resistance 2 came out around November 2008. So it was quite a long wait. That having been said, still, it was a PSP game. It was $40 as opposed to like a full retail $60 game. But I remembered picking up the final version of the game day and date, playing the first level, and just being completely overwhelmed by all the skill points and all the intel and everything else. And I ended up shelving the game. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to have to wait on this one until an FAQ comes out, because there is no way I'll be able to get very far in this game without some kind of help. And the game had just come out, and I was certain there was no help available for it yet. I could have bought a guide, but I don't know, for some odd reason I just didn't want to. So I ended up, just putting it on the shelf, turning to other games, and thinking I was going to come back to it at some point. Yeah, I never did. Well, at the very least, I didn't up until very, very, very recently. So literally the game sat on shelf for a very, very, very long time. And don't get me wrong, I didn't really dislike the game initially at all. I thought the gameplay worked well. I thought the controls worked really well, and I was really excited about the infected mode for the PSP between the PS2 and PSP and PS3 connectivity. But then I was really overwhelmed that in every level there was at least 3 skill points that you had to find, and that there was so much, intel and everything else, that it just became more of a burden than it did become any fun. And that, to me, makes the game a chore as opposed to, it just felt like a chore as opposed to any type of excitement. And those skill points, a lot of those skill points were really hard, or at the very least, very time-consuming to get. Heck, some of the intel was hard to get. And, you really had to know how to get it. You really had to know where to find it or how to get it or whatever. It was not easy. So, Resistance goes dark, and I'm thinking at that point that the Resistance franchise could be quite possibly just completely over. Because, first off, Nathan Hale was dead. Resistance Retribution had come out, and there was no further announcements of any further Resistance games. So I think at least a year passed, if not, and then there was the fake. There was the billboard in the video in the television in the movie. Somebody put up the billboard in the movie, and then people started talking again. I think it was in Battle at LA that Resistance 3. Somebody had made a Resistance 3 poster on the set. It was like a full-size billboard for Resistance 3. And the game developers got wind of it. I think somebody snapped up a picture of it and sent it to the various video game news sites. Who's like, is this an announcement that Resistance 3? Is this the announcement of Resistance 3 right here? And of course, Sony played, did not give any responses at all. And finally said that, the trailer, the live action trailer came out. and I believe it was at E3 of the year before. I'm sorry, of that, maybe, was it of 2000? No, it might have been 2009's E3. It probably was more 2010's E3. I was at 2000, and yeah, and or it was probably 2010's E3, and they did the live action trailer, and the first gameplay of it. Like really, the live action trailer was very stylized, very interesting. There were some tidbits on it, but you really couldn't tell what the heck was the plot line because you first saw it, you saw no gameplay, you saw no pre-rendered cinematics, so you didn't know what the plot was except there were humans on trains. And it looked really pretty. I mean, it was very well made, but anybody who's a real diehard fan of the series was like, "What am I seeing here? I don't know what I'm seeing. What is this? What is this trying to tell me? I just don't know." So there was that, but the first gameplay trailers came out at the Spike TV Awards, where they took like a kind of director's cut of the live action segments, and they finally spliced in gameplay, and it looked interesting. Then people were interested then, and then came the Game Informer magazine preview where they said, "Oh, it's Nathan Hale is dead. Now it's Joseph Capelli." I think I remember a few people. I mean, everybody assumed at that point that Hale was not going to be coming back for the second game. I mean, you clearly saw a hole in his head at the end of the second game. But I think some people kind of thought, especially game trailers thought, that it might have been the guy from Resistance Retribution, that the main guy from Resistance Retribution could have been the because he looks very similar to Capelli. And I should say, he looked very similar to the live-action guy that played Capelli in the. We later find out it was Capelli in the live-action trailers. He looked very similar to the actor. Capelli and this guy looked very similar. So, people might have assumed that the guy who was in Resistance Retribution, the hero of Resistance Retribution, was the main character of the third game. It would have been cool. It really would have, and from a gameplay perspective, it would have worked. I mean. It would have, but he wasn't, and it was Capelli. It's Capelli in the third game. When I attended E3 2011, Resistance 3 was actually the first game I actually got to play. The first area I went to was the Microsoft and the Sony and Nintendo areas of E3 back in 2011. And I got to demo. I think Resistance 3 was the first game I demoed. And I remember asking some of the Sony techs over there if I could record it, and they said yes, and I was really happy about that. Very nice guys over at the Sony, very, very, just wonderfully nice guys over there. And I got to sit down, and I got to demo it, and I got to record the demo, and I actually beat that demo. That demo was not easy, by the way. That demo was very hard, and I got to beat that demo with the DualShock 3 controller. Probably, in one go, which I'm very proud of because that was not an easy demo. And I cannot say the same for like the second or third day. I can't remember which, but there was another day that I actually went back and I tried demoing it with the sharpshooter controller, and I kept dying immediately. I was like, this is not this. Give me a dual. I know they were really using Resistance 3 to push the move, but yeah. That was not a good idea. It just didn't work very well at all. I couldn't do the sharpshooter. The sharpshooter just didn't. I thought to me, the controller worked a heck of a lot better than the sharpshooter did. I just kept dying when I demoed it at E3, and I have not. And as a move user, I haven't bothered with a sharpshooter. I haven't bought a sharpshooter. I'm not going to buy a sharpshooter. I just have no interest. I've got to move, and I'm probably not going to be expanding that any sooner. But at least if I get if there is a new move game or a move exclusive game coming out, I certainly will play it. So I had a good time at the Resistance, at the Resistance demo. And let me tell you something. I was really disappointed in the Uncharted guys because Uncharted 3 was showing at the TV setup right next to the Resistance setup. And whereas the Resistance 3 setup was about, I would say, half and half, meaning half single-player demo, half multiplayer demo, and you could talk to the techs about what you wanted to play, the Uncharted 3 booth was all the demo for multiplayer, was all multiplayer demos. Even though I believe, they had shown, at that point, the Uncharted guys had shown a single-player demo at E3 by that point. they didn't have it playable, at least in none of the demo kiosks that I saw. I didn't see any single-player demos for Uncharted 3. Just the multiplayer. And I think I was in the multiplayer beta test by that point. And I just wasn't interested because I was like, I can just beta test this at home. It's like, why spend time doing that? So it didn't interest me very much. But I did enjoy Resistance 3. And so a couple months pass, and Resistance 3 comes out. And do I pick it up? No, I don't. Why don't I pick it up? Well, the game didn't really have a gotta have it collector's edition. They did have a version that was bundled with the PlayStation Move. I'm sorry, with the PlayStation Sharpshooter. But it was extremely expensive, and the Sharpshooter was just, as far as I was concerned, not worth purchasing. So I just wasn't interested in it. And I figured, I could just, this is like a game that was. It had two things going against it. One, there was no real collector's edition, at least not in the United States. I heard Europe has a collector's edition of it. The second thing was I wasn't really interested in any of the pre-order incentives because they were all unlockable content anyway. In fact, actually now all the pre-order incentives are available. If you go on the PlayStation Store and look up the Resistance 3 section under the All Games section, you can download all of the pre-order incentives, skins, and stuff like that free of charge. You can get them all free and download them to your PlayStation. So there was that going against it. I wasn't really interested in the multiplayer components, so I really didn't. I mean, there was like so many games coming out at once, all of them with collector's editions, all of them with expensive collector's editions. I mean, Gears of War, Uncharted 3, games upon games upon games. Way too many games came out at the end of this year, this past year. That I just quit. Resistance just passed. I passed up Resistance. I also passed up Rage. But my intention was I was going to get them after Christmas. And sure enough, Christmas passes. I got Resistance. I got Rage. And I start playing it. And I'm loving every second of it. I got to say, I loved Resistance 3. They brought back the weapon wheel with all the expanded weapons. They got some new weapons, and I thought that was pretty cool. I did get the demo at E3. I did get the demo. The weapons were upgradable. Based upon your use of them, so that was no big surprise to me. I knew that was coming. I thought it worked pretty well, although some weapons leveled up a hell of a lot slower than they should have, particularly the Magnum. I thought the Magnum should have leveled up a lot faster. The other things were that, I love the cutscenes. I love the style of it. I loved that they kept all the cutscene viewers and all the unlockables. And that the unlockables were based upon trophies, which were reasonably, set up, all of which was very good. And then I noticed while looking at some of the unlockable content in the game store, that some of the stuff was listed as can only be unlocked under from myresistance.net. And I thought, it's probably like with Resistance 1. Where you had to, sign up to myresistance.net so you could just, view your multiplayer stats and stuff like that. And you'd get like a cloven skin code that you could unlock, and that would be the end of it. No, it turned out. I had already heard about, they had actually had a full social game there. Now, I had already heard about Global Resistance in passing, back when it launched, I think in August or maybe even sooner than that. But I think it was August. But when myresistance.net got updated from the last version, it's basically been updated with every Resistance game. There's been 3 this is, I think, with the version 3 right now. They took out the PlayStation integration. They took out the PlayStation Network integration. So people with PlayStation Network accounts couldn't get onto the site like as usual. You could only get on the site when the game launched, with a Facebook account. Why? I have absolutely no idea. It's not, Facebook is not Sony owned. At least not yet. I had absolutely no idea why they would allow a Facebook account but not a PlayStation Network account, because PlayStation Network accounts were what you got into the site in the first place. Back when it was, in the other versions. Plus, it would make sense because you're going to be using the site to check your stats. That's what I assumed it was for. Well, right after Christmas, perfect timing actually. I get Resistance 3 for Christmas. Literally right after Christmas, they put myresistance.net back on because I think it had been hacked or illegally accessed or something. Don't know what the extreme damage was on it, but I do know that I certainly wasn't a part. I didn't have any stats in there at the time, and so I got to realize after browsing the site that where the unlocks come from is in using the site, getting certain achievements in the site, but also playing Global Resistance, the site's social game, the crown jewel of the game. Now, I don't want to go and retread on what I talked about with Global Resistance because I've already reviewed it, and if you go on my site, GameAccess.net, you can find the full Global Resistance review that I've done. I actually quite enjoyed it a bit when the site worked. I thought it was swamped during the day, and it still is in a lot of ways. So, but I gotta say that probably it was the most fun. The whole point about Global Resistance is that you've basically got things that you're going to do that require time, whether it be building things or setting things up or having missions set up or just waiting for things to become available again. Everything is all time dependent. Well, you could spend that time playing a level of Resistance 3. So I remember going back and forth, like playing a level of Resistance 3, building something, or starting to build something, play another level of Resistance 3. Oh, that's done. Give it some more things to do. Go back to the game, and so on. That was awesome. And if I gotta say, that was probably some of the most fun I've had gaming in quite a while. Because it was just so immersive in that respect. And plus, because all the stats worked for each other, the games were interconnected in that way. I could do things back and forth, and it would count for both. However, a thing that I did notice, like I said, the site does have latency issues, especially during the daytime. It seems to be better at night, but you still might have connectivity problems with the site. I don't know why. For all I can tell is like usually usually it says that the site there's only like about 191 people, and the site could be really bogged down, and that's really weird. Although it has been getting better over the last couple of days, it still lags out occasionally, especially during times of heavy play, and when the clocks are winding down, like when the clock timers for war are winding down. So there's that. So, but it's a fun game, even if you don't have a copy of Resistance. Hell, even if you don't have a copy of even if you don't have a PlayStation 3, you can still play the game, and it's fun. I mean, I was having a blast with it. I unlocked a lot. I even got some friends that don't have PlayStation 3s to play it. They enjoyed it also. So, I really did like how I played through Resistance 3 twice. I really liked how it ended a lot. I wish if I had one complaint about it, it was that I did not like the fact that there were not too many story-driven trophies in the game like there were for Resistance 2. Like there weren't a lot of. I think there was one trophy for completing the game. Well, I'm sorry, there's two. One for completing the game on any difficulty, one for completing the game on the highest difficulty, and there's one trophy for like at one story-driven part in the game. So over the course of the game, you're guaranteed at least 2 trophies if you beat it. That's it. That I didn't like. I wish that there were more trophies, especially given the fact there were a few moments in the game which certainly just deserved, that at least were trophy-worthy moments, like beating the Satan monster in particular. I thought was trophy-worthy. So yeah, there was that. The other trophies, there were level-specific trophies, but they were all conditional. Like you had to beat a monster without getting hit even once, which, trust me, was very difficult because the monsters would always be getting directly for you. Or beat this monster with this, or do this with that. And unless you looked up an FAQ, you wouldn't know how to do it in most cases. And some of them are really, really, really hard to do. Or really hard to do. Like one in particular, I played through the game twice. I still wasn't able to get one in particular. I wasn't able to keep attackers out of Washington Square. Although after I beat it, I'll probably go back with my leveled up weapons and try it again. I think it's doable, but it's tough. It's really tough. So there's all that. There's all that's responsible. So after probably around the time I was working on Resistance 3 a second time, I decided to do this podcast. And I realized after making the announcement that I was going to do this podcast, even though Resistance was fresh in my mind and everything else, I still hadn't played Resistance Retribution. It had been sitting on my shelf collecting dust, as had my PSP, to be perfectly honest. I haven't had a new PSP game to play in quite a while, although when I do, I enjoy it quite a bit. Resistance Retribution, I figured I had to finally suck it up and play. And I did. And I haven't beaten it. I've gotten about halfway through the game. And the reason why I haven't beaten it is because, as a completionist, it's been very slow going. It must take me a couple hours just to get through one level, because not only am I trying to get through the level, but I'm also trying to get every intel that I can get, with the exception of the infected intels. I'll talk about that in just a second. And all the skill points. And there's 3 skill points per level. There's 3 levels per act, and I think there's there's 4 levels per act, with one exception. I think there was one that's 3 levels. And there's 5 or 6 acts. And that is absolutely crazy. With 1 or 2 exceptions, there's about 4 intels per level, and then there's the infected intel, which you can only get in the infected campaign. A completionist will unlock everything. There's a lot of unlocks in that game. And as a completionist, yeah, I have to do all that. So I got about halfway through the game, and I was thinking, this is really slow going. Maybe I could try resetting the game with the infected mode on and try to basically get back up to where I was, which you can do. If I had one complaint about the infected mode, I noticed that the game does certainly have a different plot line. Grayson reacts differently. People react differently to Grayson. But the pre-rendered cinematics didn't change. So it's kind of weird that he appears in one way in the game and the other way in the pre-rendered cinematics. Now, for the most part, that probably wouldn't affect story that much, at least not up to what I saw. But what would affect story a lot would have been, and what they should have done was, I think that they should have at least had a different opening. Which, when I first saw the previews, I was told there was going to be a different opening for the infected campaign, a different pre-rendered opening. But I don't know, help me out here if there is, or post a comment, because I didn't really start, I don't think I remember starting an infected campaign with just a start, because I was told if I did that I would lose all my progress. I just played the levels individually, including which you also can do. Once you've played through them, you can play the levels individually. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that, because that was kind of odd, I thought. That was really odd, because I was not able to do that. I mean, I get that they were trying to go for 2 different campaigns, and I understand that there's space limitations and memory limitations and stuff like that, but they really should have tweaked the opening, I thought, or at the very least given something secondary to show for the infected campaign. And that's my one complaint about it. I never tried the Resistance 3 multiplayer, although I have set that up. I'm kind of trying to get everything unlocked in Global Resistance before I try playing multiplayer in Resistance 3. Although the Global Resistance has given me some free XP. I haven't tried multiplayer in Resistance Retribution either yet, so I don't really have a comment about either of those. I do know that Infected mode doesn't work on Resistance Retribution, probably because they added in regen in Resistance Retribution. That might break multiplayer if they did that. So there's that. Overall, it's been a great series. I know I'm going to finish Resistance Retribution at some point. I'm really banking on that. The storyline actually did seem interesting, and I did like that they brought back the weapon wheel, and I did like that they brought back the narrated cutscenes. And in the timeline of the games, actually, Resistance Retribution does fall between Resistance 1 and Resistance 2. And of course, Resistance 3 takes place at the very end. When it came down to the stylistic about what the best stories was, I still think Resistance 1 was the best, although I haven't beaten Resistance Retribution, so I can't really vouch for that. I did like all the other stories, though. I really did. Probably some of the best set pieces was, like I said, that big fight in the middle of the second game was awesome. I also like the train segment in the third game. I like that. I thought that was and the boat segment in the third game also. Those were two really great moments. I thought a lot of great moments I liked in the third game. So yeah, there's also a book, and there's a paperback graphic novel as well. So it's a pretty big franchise. I have the book. I don't have the graphic novel, although I read the first issue of it. Quite a franchise Sony's got here. I can't wait to see what they're doing in the future. I know there's going to be an exclusive Vita game, but other than that, there's been no talk about a Resistance 4, which is possible. Might do any type of, they might do a Resistance 4, because Resistance 3 certainly did not end the series at all. Chimera is still present on Earth. Spoilers, sorry. But I know that a lot of people were probably, certainly I was, expecting more closure, and we didn't seem to get it. So there was that. So that's the end of the Game Access podcast for Resistance. I'd like to thank all of you for listening to me ramble on. Hope you enjoyed it. It was good to talk about all this. And I just want to say that based upon popular request, please tune in for my next podcast, which will be on Dead Space. So until next time, guys, this is Maniac with GameAccess.net. I'll see you online, guys. Over and out.